Hello and welcome to session 24. Here we will continue speaking about consciousness and get more into the idea of consciousness and communication with the higher self. We talked about becoming closer to more spiritual things, and for many this will mean, through meditation and other methods, becoming closer to their own intuitive sense, their conscience, their still small voice within, their higher self. For some of these persons, there may be somewhere along the way the beginning of a feeling like a wonderful tingle or shiver up and down the spine that we've already talked about in regard to communication from the higher self, or even other higher positive forces. This is often the eventual manner in which our higher self may initially open the door to a level of communication that can be the beginning of very great blessings. The communication in that manner can begin in meditation and may eventually grow to mental verbal communication, as has also been previously indicated. As our level of understanding and our level of commitment to service continue to grow, our level of spirituality grows also. During that time, when there is a period of such communication and spiritual growth, it may be worthwhile for you to begin to consult your guide, usually your higher self, regarding more and more of your personal decisions, not regarding things that others want you to ask, but about decisions that you need to make on a day-to-day and perhaps even on an hour-to-hour basis to encourage and develop that rapport. Don't ask about those things that would be a frivolous use of your guide and of this blessing that has been given to you, but simply ask about those decisions which you need to consider for yourself throughout each day. It will bring about a greater closeness and rapport between you and your guide that wisdom would indicate should be increasingly encouraged. If you do not want or need that closeness, if you're not ready for it yet, or if your guide says or indicates in some way that it is too soon, then wait, of course. Otherwise, increase gradually the rapport as you receive your guide's approval. Remember, however, that we are all agents of free will, so you're not asking your guide for permission in any particular matter, but you are instead seeking guidance regarding which of the choices available to you would be recommended or suggested to you by your guide to be in your best interest from a spiritual point of view. It is also often done to seek to know, so that you may then therefore do the will of your unseen guide. Let your will be done, in other words. For a great many of such people, the wonderful blessing of being able to communicate freely with their higher self throughout the balance of their lifetime may be all that will be needed for them in this incarnation. Excuse me. A few, however, may need to complete the teachings that are to be given by the higher self and go on to additional teachings, perhaps from those who would be considered unseen ascended masters. Even that great blessing may not necessarily be the end of training and spiritual development for a few of those seekers. The importance of establishing communication with the higher self cannot be overemphasized, since, as you can see, it has the potential to lead to communication at even higher levels and with even greater benefit to your personal spiritual development. I'd like to take a moment here and say this to you. I've talked about things that are very, very rare. And if you are reading this and it seems to be to you something that can never happen to you, or maybe you have made some development, you've made some spiritual advancement and you're very grateful for that, but you don't see yourself reaching these particular levels, it is not something for you to be frustrated or distracted or concerned about or upset about or anxious about. Each of us who have a good heart and are willing to make the commitment to, over a period of time, gradually give a little more and more of self, and more and more of service, rather, and less for self. Excuse me. We'll find that it is worthwhile to be aware that what blessings we receive are blessings to be very, very grateful for having. But do not become frustrated or anxious or feel deficient in any manner simply because what I've described here doesn't somehow describe what's happening to you. These are exceedingly rare, exceedingly rare. But I'm describing them for those very few who may reach this level. Now, we've talked a great deal about the higher self that's a part of each of us. Perhaps this is a good opportunity to talk about the opposite of the higher self, which is a negative part of ourselves that we must also learn to recognize and approach properly and carefully. Once communication with the higher self has been established, one continues over a period of time to work with the higher self. During the time that this is taking place, a point in time eventually comes when the lower self begins to make its presence known. It does not normally identify itself, but by careful observation you may begin to notice that there are times when answers that you receive do not seem to be in keeping with the high principles that you've come to identify with the normal answers that you receive from your higher self. Once that time has come, you must exercise caution whenever you feel that there may be a question in your mind about the source of the information or the validity of the information that you receive. You have been given questions that you can ask to help you ascertain that the answers are dependable. Once that negative source has been identified, however, you can then take the necessary precautions to protect the integrity of the answers you receive. In addition, through a purposeful process of spiritual growth, you will eventually be able to brighten your own inner light to the degree that your lower self will no longer be able to tolerate that brilliant light, and, sometimes groaning, sometimes screaming in protest, it leaves you as you release it into the hands of those whose duty and authority it is to deal with it at that point in time. There's an example of this in the book Brother of the Third Degree, as the negative spirit is released and leaves with a groan of protest. You must never attack the lower self or any being with light or in any other way. You may surround or fill yourself with light through visualization as defense, but never, never for attack. When your inner light has grown sufficiently bright, the lower self will leave you of its own accord, because it will not be able to stand the brilliance of the light. And you will, at that time, release it into the proper hands, as stated earlier. Remember that this process also of brightening your inner light is not an overnight project, just as the rest of spiritual development. Be willing to let such things take whatever time they need to take. For as long as we continue to seek to serve, and we do not return to the practice of giving a high priority for seeking for self, which in effect can allow the lower self to return, perhaps almost unnoticed, then as long as we do not do that, we can continue to safely act as an instrument of our guide, our higher self, and so on. It can continue thus throughout the remainder of one's life. Or it may be that one will eventually begin receiving instruction from a yet higher instructor or source, who then becomes the guide within this hierarchical structure of higher level, unseen, positive spirit guides. The concept of having a higher self and a lower self, both as a part of the same person, can be difficult for some to consider. If, however, you can accept the fact that we have a subconscious level of understanding, as well as a conscious level of understanding, then perhaps you've already accepted the idea that there are different levels of consciousness. One of those levels, the conscious level self, is not necessarily aware of the subconscious, even though they are different aspects, or should we say perhaps even different parts of the same person. If you accept that such a thing can be possible, then perhaps you could further accept the idea that there is a higher self, a lower self, and a self that is aware at a conscious physical level of existence. Just as the conscious and the subconscious mind are perceived to be different, but still are the same person, perhaps you would concede that the concept of a higher, lower, and conscious level self could all coexist as different aspects or perhaps different parts of the same single person. As we experience life on earth, especially if we've chosen the path of seeking spiritual growth and enlightenment, our levels of consciousness can grow in understanding, bringing about positive change. Once again, this is information that's important enough to repeat. I will therefore restate that when these positive changes come about, and we grow spiritually so that the light within us then becomes bright enough, the lower aspect of ourselves will eventually make the decision to leave. When that time is right, then we release the lower self into the hands of those entities who have the duty and authority to deal with it. That is the manner in which this process is properly accomplished. This does not please the lower self, but when the light within us as a natural process becomes bright enough, it, meaning the lower self, cannot and will not stay. The higher self, or the master within, which some may call this also the soul personality, is the sum total of this life and its experiences, as well as all of our past lives and their experiences, and therefore will express or manifest a level of understanding that is appropriate to that sum total. We do not all choose to make the same number of right decisions in our lifetimes here, and therefore that sum total for one person will not necessarily be the same as the sum total for another. In order to continue growing and learning, however, we choose to reincarnate here to add to our learning, our sum total, through these life experiences. The conscious level self has various opportunities to make decisions that some would call right decisions, and decisions that some would call wrong decisions, or decisions that are not of the highest nature. The more right decisions that are made, the more we grow as a conscious level person and as a higher level personality. The so-called wrong decisions, or those decisions that are not of the highest nature, can theoretically hold us back. Yet, depending on where we happen to be in our personal spiritual development, it may play a part in actually teaching us from a different perspective, and thereby helping us learn the needed lesson. If we need to learn more completely a particular lesson, or in other words, to be held back, then it might be better if we make the decision that way, or incorrectly in a way, to give us a little more time to learn to deal with the situation more perfectly when we meet it again. This is a very complex concept, and I understand that. And in order to help you understand it better, perhaps this is a good point at which to say that it will actually be more accurate if we changed our terminology so that instead of saying that we make a right or a wrong decision, we might better say that our decisions can take us in one direction or another. One of those directions will take us to our eventual destination more directly. But if we have made the other decision, then the reason for that is probably because we need the extra time to learn more perfectly the needed lessons so that we will be adequately prepared when we do reach that eventual destination. Sadly, some will read that statement and use it as an excuse to make a decision that's not the one that they know should be made. That would not be wise. We should do what we're reasonably able to do and not look for excuses to procrastinate. I want to thank you for watching this session number 24. I trust that you found it to be interesting. You're invited to watch session number 25, where we will continue this discussion. Thank you very much.